Okay. Welcome to the Inland Valley Storytellers Zoom Story Swap. I'm John St. Clair, and I am your Zoom host. And we have a small group today, and not everybody knows each other. So I think I'd like to start it out. Everybody unmute themselves and just say who you are and where you're from. So I'm John St. Clair from Ontario.
I'm Chris St. Clair from Ontario.
And I'm Walter Roth from Riverside.
I'm John Geddes from Laverne.
There we go. Okay, so now this is being recorded and it'll be posted on the YouTube channel that we have. And at this point, Chris has volunteered to tell first, so I'm going to remove the spotlight from me and put the spotlight on her and mute myself.
Oh my, we have a busy kitchen. I'm not used to telling, so I'm just going to cheat a little bit now and then. This story was sent by a woman named Sarah Jane Sunjay Owen, who's an English woman who now lives in Pine Mountain, California. An elderly Chinese woman had two large pots. Each one hung on the ends of a pole, which she carried across her neck. One of the pots had a crack in the side, while the other was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water. Now, hello, Elizabeth. Hi, Angela. I will start again.
Oh, good.
I didn't see you in a long time. I'm glad to see you.
Thank you.
Glad to see everybody, actually.
Yeah. An elderly Chinese woman had two large pots. One was perfect and carried a full portion of water each time it's used. And the other had a crack in it. So when they only delivered half a portion of water and the long walks to the stream, she would fill them both at the stream and then walk back. And when she got back, there was a jar of water and a half jar of water. Of course, the perfect pot was very proud that it delivered full portion each time. But the one with the crack was very disappointed in itself, and after 2 years was just miserable. And finally, when the woman went with her two pots on either side of the pole on her neck to the river and filled both pots, the cracked pot complained bitterly, "I am so ashamed that I can only give you half of what I should give you by the time we get back to home." And the woman said, "You know, that's not a problem." And the pots, "Well, how could that be?" And she said, "Well, do you see on your side of the path as we walk back home, there are flowers growing all along the path, and there aren't any on the other side. I noticed that the water was going there on that side, on your side, and so I bought some flower seeds and I planted those flowers, and we've been watering them every day as we go past, and now we have a beautiful path to walk past as we go to our home. Thank you. You water them." Thank you.
That's a wonderful story, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who would like to be next?
I guess I will.
Okay, I'll put the spotlight on you.
Okay, this time I'm going to read a poem. It's a poem written by a guy who really wasn't a poet. He was a bank teller, a bank clerk. He was born in England. He immigrated to Canada and lived all of his adult life in Canada. His name was Robert Service. He wanted to be an adventurer, and he did spend a lot of his early life trying to be a cowboy, farmer, and a bank clerk, all these things. None of them were very successful. He ended up going way in the northern country in Canada and near Alaska. And this was right around 1900. So the Alaskan gold rush started around 1896 and had just finished up. So the people he was living in a town called Whitehorse. It's a tiny town in the Yukon Territory. And the people that lived there were miners, and he learned a lot from them. And this is in the days before television, radio, or anything like that. And so to entertain themselves every week, they would meet in the church, and they would do kind of what we're doing. They would swap stories. And one of the things he liked to do was to recite poetry. And the guy that ran a little tiny newspaper said, you know what? That's getting kind of old. Why don't you write some original material and write it about our area that nobody writes about? Write it about the Yukon Territory. So he got this idea of writing a poem that was kind of earthy and authentic and reflected the kind of life that was lived up there in that rugged territory. So this is called The Shooting of Dan Mcgrew. A bunch of the boys were, I'm going to wear my glasses, sorry. A bunch of the boys were hooping it up in the Malamute Saloon. The kid that handles the music box was hitting a ragtime tune. Back of the bar in a solo game sat dangerous Dan Mcgrew, and watching his luck was the light of his life, the lady that's known as Lou. When out of the night, which was 50 below, and into the din and the glare, there stumbled a miner, which was fresh from the creeks, dog dirty and loaded for bear. He looked like a man with one foot in the grave and scarcely the strength of a louse. Yet he tilted a poke of dust on the bar and called for drinks for the house. There was none could place the stranger's face, though we searched ourselves for a clue. But we drank to his health, and the last to drink was dangerous Dan Mcgrew. There's men that somehow just grip your eyes and hold them hard like a spell. And such was he, and he looked to me like a man who'd lived through hell. With a face, mostly hair, and a dreary stare of a dog whose day is done, as he watered the green stuff in his glass, and the drops fell one by one. Then I got to figuring who he was and wondering what he would do. And I turned my head, and there watching him was the lady that's known as Lou. His eyes went rubbering around the room, and he seemed in kind of a daze, till at last that old piano fell in the way of his wandering gaze. The ragtime kid was having a drink, so there was no one else on the stool. So the stranger stumbles across the room and flops down there like a fool. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt, he sat, and I saw him sway. And he clutched the keys with his talon hands. My God, but that man could play. Were you ever out in the great alone when the moon was awful clear and the icy mountains hemmed you in with a silence you almost could hear? With only the howl of the timber wolf, you camped there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold. while high overhead, green, yellow, and red, the northern lights swept in bars, well, then you have a hunch of what that music meant: hunger and night and stars. And hunger not of the belly kind that's banished with bacon and beans, but a gnawing hunger of a lonely man for a home and all that it means, for a fireside far from the cares that are, four walls and a roof above. But oh, what a cram full of cozy joy and crowned with a woman's love. A woman dearer than all the world and true as heaven is true. My God, how ghastly she looks through her rouge, the lady that's known as Lou. Then all of a sudden the music changed, so soft you could scarcely hear. But you felt that your life had been looted clean of all that it once held dear, that someone had stolen the woman you loved, and that her love was a devil's lie, that your guts were gone and the best for you was to crawl away and die. 'Twas the crowning cry of a heart's despair, and it thrilled you through and through. I guess I'll make it a spread misery, said dangerous Dan Mcgrew. The music almost died away, then it burst like a pent-up flood, and it seemed to say, repay, repay, and his eyes were blind with blood. The thought came back of an ancient wrong, and it stung like a frozen lash, and the lust awoke to kill, and the music stopped with a crash. And the stranger turned, and his eyes that burned in a most peculiar way. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt, he sat, and I saw him sway. Then his lips went into a kind of a grin, and he spoke, and his voice was calm. Boys, he said, you don't know me, and none of you give a damn, but I want to state, and my words are straight, that I bet, and I'll bet my poke that they're true, that one of you is a hound of hell, and that one is Dan Mcgrew. Then I ducked my head, and the lights went out, and two guns blazed in the dark. A woman screamed, and the lights went up, and two men lay stiff and stark. Pitched on his head and pumped full of lead was dangerous Dan Mcgrew, while the man from the creeks lay clutched to the breast of the lady that's known as Lou. These are the simple facts of the case, and I guess I ought to know. They say that the stranger was crazed with hooch, and I'm not denying it so. I'm not so wise as the lawyer guys, but strictly between us two, the woman that kissed him and pinched his poke was the lady that's known as Lou.
Wow, that's quite a poem. Wow.
Very nice.
Yeah, and I like the story behind it you told to introduce. Yeah. That's great.
He ended up writing a whole series of poems and made a book called Sourdough Tales, I think is what it was called, and achieved a kind of a fame, even though he never really wanted to be a poet.
Wow. Okay, thank you, Walter. Who would like to be next? We've had several people join us. Adrian and Nick and Angela and Elizabeth. Any takers? Nick, you want to be next?
Sure, because oddly enough, this is slightly related to that in terms of its place in our culture. I was in an online discussion with some other storytellers about tall tales versus historical figures and what happened with that sort of a thing, and how Walt Disney contributed to some of the blurring of that distinction, because he included some real people in stuff in ways that made them seem like tall tale characters. And one of the people that was popularized by Disney in such a way was Mike Fink. Now, Mike Fink was a real man in the building of the American West, but he was a contemporary of David Crockett. And some say they were friends. In fact, Crockett himself said they were friends and said some interesting stories about Mike Fink in his Crockett Almanacs. including well after he died, because they kept getting published after Crockett had died, but that's another story. The thing is, Mike Fink was a boatman on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. He captained keelboats, which meant that you could go downstream easily, but upstream only with difficulty because they had no motors. So you had to pull them or push them up the rivers. And going down the rivers, you would take large quantities of goods from the farmlands up in the Midwest down to the ports. Going back up, you would take yourself and the boats, and frankly, that was a lot of work. So he and his crew would go back and forth. And one time on his way back up the river, they were running low on food. And, you know, being the sort of fella he was, Mike Fink was known to play a trick or two on folks from time to time, and also to be on the thrifty side, shall we say. And if he could get food and other goods without paying for them, he would accept them. He wouldn't steal exactly. And so it was that he turned to one of his crewmen, and they were looking over the side and seeing that there was a flock of sheep on the hills near the river. And Mike Fink said, you know, one of those sheep would make for some mighty fine food.
I go to Mama.
Somebody's microphone is open. Anyway, he said that would make for some mighty fine food, but he didn't want to just buy a sheep from the shepherd. So he said, I think I'll see if I can get him to give us one. Well, he went back into the cabin of the keelboat and got a couple of things, but the main thing he got was a bag of snuff. And he took that and pulled that pouch out and went out and carefully looked to see if the shepherd was nearby. Shepherd wasn't nearby. And so Mike Fink, he poured some of that snuff into his hand, went up to one of the sheep and pushed that snuff into the snout of that sheep. Well, let me tell you, that sheep was not happy. It bounced, it snorted, it bucked, it sneezed, it ran around scaring all the other sheep. Well, Mike Fink, he just stood there, and he figured, sure enough, the shepherd would notice this, and shepherd came running down the hill, and he said, what happened to that sheep? Well, said Mike, now I'm not one of those fancy doctors for animals, but I've heard tell that this one has symptoms like something I've heard of. You see, there's something where an animal like a sheep will start acting all crazed like that. And the thing called the black murrain, oh, it's fatal eventually and contagious to other animals. Pity you're out here with nobody to take care of it for you, and it's going to get mixed in with your other sheep. And if this one's sick, it might make the other sick, if that's what it has. And the shepherd said, well, what can we do? Well, said Mike, you could just shoot it and then take care of it that way, put it off to the side so that the other sheep won't get infected if that's what it has. I can't do that. I'm not a marksman, and it's running around in through my other sheep. Well, said Mike Fink, I could probably take care of that for you. But if I do that, will you give me the sheep? Because I can cut the wool off of it and maybe save some of the meat for my crew and I. That way, we'll kill two birds with one stone, as it were. If you can shoot that one, yes, you can take it. You can take the wool, you can take the meat, anything. Just get it away from the rest of my flock. Well, sir, I can do that. And Mike Fink, he pulled the rifle off his back, aimed it, and just as that sheep leaped up into the air from that snorting it was doing, from that snuff in its face, bang, he killed it with one shot because he was a merciful kind of man. and went over and dragged it back down to the keel boat. Now we got to it right away, so if that was the black moraine, I doubt if any of your other sheep have caught it. Thank you so much, said the shepherd. No trouble at all, said Mike Fink. And he took the sheep back down to the boat. They pulled that boat a ways up the river, came ashore, built a nice fire, had them a roast mutton that was just wonderful. Tasted a little bit of tobacco, though.
Thank you, Nick. That was a good one. So,
well, see, stories like that were actually very popular. And David Crockett, he really didn't like to be called Davy, by the way, because that wasn't proper for a congressman. But David Crockett actually licensed his name for the use in what was called the Crockett Almanacs. And publishers came out with these collections of weather predictions and weird humor and tall tale stories and all sorts of stuff under his name for years after he died. In fact, they kept coming out.
So what category would that story fall under?
Well, now, both Mike Fink and David Crockett probably would have said that was perfectly true, because it was the kind of thing that Mike Fink had a reputation for, including the marksmanship and the odd sense of humor and being willing to do something like that as a trick. He probably wouldn't have done it if it was a man's last sheep, but if a man had a flock of sheep, he could afford one, right?
Yeah. Okay, who would like to be next? I can't see you all, so speak up if you want. Angela isn't quite ready.
I'll have something to read if that's all right.
Sure.
It's okay.
Seems like we're allowing that tonight.
Well, I don't have this memorized, but it is one of the most compelling passages of literature that I've had the blessing to teach my students. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have ever read Alice Walker's essay In Search of Our Mother's Gardens? Anybody? She's the one who wrote Color Purple.
No.
Oh, okay. So this will be fresh for a lot of you. Okay. Because she has this beautiful essay. That's the title essay of her collection called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and kind of connecting to Chris's story about gardens. And we just had Mother's Day. She raises the question about, what did Black slave women do when they had a creative urge, but they didn't even own their own time or their own bodies? How did they express themselves? And this, I read this in college, and it was one of those paradigm shifting essays, and Walker writes like a storyteller that she is. So I just thought I wanted to just read a passage of this from toward the end of her essay, because she's talking about she toward the end of the essay, she gets to her mother and talking about her life and her story, and working all day long beside her father and making the kids clothes and everything. And and then there's the question, she says, but when, you will ask, did my overworked mother have time to know or care about feeding the creative spirit? The answer is so simple that many of us have spent years discovering it. We have constantly looked high when we should have looked low. Our mothers and grandmothers have, more often than not, anonymously handed on the creative spark, the seed of the flower that they themselves never hoped to see, or like a sealed letter they could not plainly read. And so it is certainly with my own mother. Unlike Ma, Ma Rainey's songs, which retained their creator's name, even while blasting forth from Bessie Smith's mouth, no song or poem will bear my mother's name. Yet so many of the stories that I write, that we all write, are my mother's stories. Only recently did I fully realize this, that through years of listening to my mother's stories of her life, I have absorbed not only the stories themselves, but something of the manner in which she spoke, something of the urgency that involves the knowledge that her stories, like herself, must be recorded. It is probably for this reason that so much of what I have written is about the characters whose counterparts in real life are so much older than I am. But the telling of these stories, which came from my mother's lips as naturally as breathing, was not the only way my mother showed herself as an artist. For stories, too, were subject to being distracted, to dying without conclusion. Dinners must be started and cotton must be gathered before the big rains. The artist that it was and is my mother showed itself to me only after many years. This is what I finally noticed. Like Mem, a character in The Third Life of Grange Copeland, this was Alice Walker's first novel, my mother adorned with flowers whatever shabby house we were forced to live in. She not just your typical straggly country stand of zinnias either. She planted ambitious gardens and still does, with over 50 different varieties of plants that bloom profusely from early March until late November. Before she left home for the fields, she watered her flowers, chopped up the grass, and laid out new beds. When she returned from the fields, she might divide clumps of bulbs, dig a cold pit, uproot and replant roses, or prune branches from the taller bushes or trees, until night came and it was too dark to see. Whatever she planted grew as if by magic, and her fame as a grower of flowers spread over 3 counties. Because of her creativity with her flowers, even my memories of poverty are seen through a screen of blooms. Sunflowers, petunias, roses, dahlias, forsythia, spirea, delphinium, verbena, and on and on. And I remember people coming to my mother's yard to be given cuttings from her flowers. I hear again the praise showered on her because whatever rocky soil she landed on, she turned into a garden so brilliant with colors, so original in its design, so magnificent with life and creativity that to this day people drive by our house in Georgia, perfect strangers and imperfect strangers, and ask to stand or walk among my mother's art. I notice that it is only when my mother is working in her flowers that she is radiant, almost to the point of being invisible, except as creator, hand and eye. She's involved in work her soul must have, ordering the universe in the image of her personal conception of beauty. Her face, as she prepares the art that is her gift, is a legacy of respect she leaves for me, for all that illuminates and cherishes life. She has handed down the respect for possibilities and the will to grasp them. For her, so hindered and intruded upon in so many ways, being an artist has still been a daily part of her life. This ability to hold on, even in very simple ways, as work Black women have done for a very long time. This poem is not enough, but it is something for the woman who literally covered the holes in her walls with sunflowers. They were women then, my mama's generation, husky of voice, stout of step, with fists as well as hands. How they battered down doors in iron-starched white shirts. How they led armies, head-ragged generals across mined fields, booby-trapped kitchens to discover books, desks, a place for us. How they knew what we must know without knowing a page of it themselves. Guided by my heritage of a love of beauty and a respect for strength in search of my mother's garden, I found my own. And perhaps in Africa, over 200 years ago, There was just such a mother. Perhaps she painted vivid and daring decorations in oranges and yellows and greens on the walls of her hut. Perhaps she sang in a voice like Roberta Flack's sweetly over the compounds of her village. Perhaps she wove the most stunning mats or told the most ingenious stories of all the village storytellers. Perhaps she was herself a poet, though only her daughter's name is signed to the poems that we know. Perhaps Phyllis Wheatley's mother was also an artist. Perhaps in more than Phyllis Wheatley's biological life is her mother's signature made clear. And I love that essay. Just, yeah, Chris, it just talks so much about where we get our heritage of art and the love for art and keeping those possibilities alive. I was thinking a lot about my own mom this last week, of course, who didn't get to fulfill all her dreams, but she kept the possibility of achieving dreams open and knew what I needed to know to try to reach some of my dreams. And I love that essay, not just because it's so beautifully written, but because she points out something that I don't think we give a lot of thought to. And I just wanted to kind of share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I can certainly relate to gardening as an art form, because both Chris and I love to garden. Mm-hmm. And we have people stop and take pictures of our front yard and ask for cuttings.
Yeah, I figured you folks would appreciate that in particular.
Nice.
Oh, thanks. By the way, I was going to tell you, I told that story about Turtle getting the new shell, that folklore version of what Family Promise does to help families experiencing homelessness. I told it at our big event on March 26th, and it went over really well. And I've gotten a few suggestions from folks to finish the story, finish writing it out, so it's not just in oral form in the last half of it. And actually maybe look for an illustrator and create a real book out of it. Cool. And maybe even do like coloring pages out of it for the kids that will be at the day center from the families that Family Promise will be helping. We're hoping to open our doors in August and start helping families at that point transition to permanent housing.
That's great.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
I love coloring pages.
I know. The secret is I'm gonna want to color them myself.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Angela, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm sort of ready. I'm walking my dog, but I brought the poem with me, so I can see her from where I am. So I'm gonna set up my phone in the car. I drive to get my mail here. It's right here on the property. Let me see what happens if I do. There, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm in the car, but I'm parked and Maddie's walking. So, hi everybody. I'm so comfy in my car. I get in it when I'm at home.
Huh.
So it is Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day on Monday. And I joined a swap group from the Northeast yesterday. It's called the Hobbs Swap Group. And I shared this poem. It's one that I wrote. It's one that I wrote for my cousin. I have a cousin, Beth, who lives in Chino, California. And her daddy was my mother's brother. So I'm going to share this poem. Her mother's name was Margaret. Beth's mother's name was Margaret. And my mother's name is Caroline. So her mama, before I read it, her mother had passed away, and I had only met her mother a couple times. And I wanted to write a letter of sympathy, and I honestly did not know what to say. But I spent an entire day, it ended up an entire day, and I wrote this piece for her. I did not know your mother well. I only know you loved her and stood by her and blessed her with your heart and soul. I'm thinking about you and your family, father, brothers, sister, husband, daughters, sons, sister, husband, daughters, sons, as you let her go. Spirit close, body gone, household left behind. I still have my mother's dresses. I still have my mother's purses, some dresses, and passport too. An old Venezuela driver's license, lipsticks and letters, bottles of perfume, the music she wrote, the prayers she said, her composing ink pen, photos of her standing in the sun, sitting in the shade. The surprise of her death is a memory. 13 years in June. It's now 42 years. It marks the days I began to sing solo in concert, sonnets, poems, and old tunes. I see her hands in mine when I wear white long sleeve blouses and wash the dishes. I feel her face in mine sometimes, just now a look of contemplation. I will always miss my mother. Grief drops by in the night, in the day. I seldom anticipate when, yet she always walks with me gentle. Mystery, memory, and hope, song and joy. I remember you traveling, Beth. It meant so much to us for you to come to Florida, August 1980. We held a memorial service there. We buried my mother in Mallorca, Spain. Her friends wanted to gather here. So my father asked me to go and get flowers, and I purchased silk blossoms to put in the vases. Some were pink and yellow, light, bright blue. Mom's favorite were those dark, rich red roses. I gave some to her friends. Did I give any to you? I saved the other silk roses in a vase for several years and then put them on an old umbrella. I had taken the fabric off of the frame, tied on long ribbons, all different colors. A rose went on the tip of every spoke. There were exactly enough to go around. I carried it in concert, festival, and parade, swinging, swirling like a beautiful crown. I still use this umbrella today as each tired frame broke down. I moved the flowers late at night from one umbrella frame to another. Now the roses are back in a vase. Their stems the spokes of a used umbrella. Dark, rich red roses are growing in my California garden. Life goes on. Circles do come round. It's only in the turning you find the change. If you searched, if you searched for a cooking pot from a home that had never known sorrow, you would come home with empty arms and you would go looking again tomorrow. You've just now joined the others of us whose mothers have all gone home. I'm thinking of you and wishing you joy and comfort in your sorrow. That's May 19th, 1993, for Margaret and Caroline.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
That is really beautiful. So beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this with us. My mother passed away relatively recently in 2020. And now listening to you, try to preserve her memory. That is really a very big inspiration for me, because I was going to take everything out and give it away. So now I'm going to think twice of doing that.
I still have so many of her objects. I still have her purse, her passport, her composing ink pen. I still have a couple of her dresses, you know. So I have released quite a few of them over time, and I've passed them on to my nieces. They're old enough now. They're in their early 20s. I still have the red velvet dress my mother wore at Carnegie Recital Hall. So that was in 1974. But yeah, yeah.
That's really great, remarkable. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I've had a hard time letting go of things from my mother. I have one humorous thing I saved. It was her driver's license.
Yeah.
And my mother was very petite. And this driver's license was when she was probably in her 80s. And by then she probably was under 5 feet tall and was, as I say, petite. Well, the driver's license had a typographical error. It listed her weight as 980 pounds. And it should have been 98.
That's awesome. It's funny, I happened to take a young man today to get his real ID. He's 18. He's the boy of a friend of mine whose husband died of COVID in October. This is his son. And so he's stayed living in her home this last year so that he can graduate. And all of our hearts are just totally broken for him, because he has so few skills and he's so alone. And his dad has grown brothers and sisters. There's probably 8 relatives related to his father. His birth mother's in New York, and he has 2 older sisters, and nobody has anything to do with him. And he's just so alone. And I took him to get his ID, his real ID today at the DMV. He was directed to do that 4 months ago. We finally did it today. And when he went to get his picture taken at the DMV, I showed him my picture, my license. And I said, I always have a goal when I get my photo taken at the DMV to have a cheerful face, cheerful look. Because when the policemen pull me over, I'm not going to be looking like that. So I just want them to know that I have another way of being in the world, not just traumatized because I just got caught speeding again. I have a very long history of driving. It's gotten a lot better over the past, especially the past 2 years, because I don't go anywhere. But it has improved the last 5 years. Anyway, so he laughed, and he has beautiful, dark, curly black hair, and it's always in his face. And I said, you need to pull your hair back from your face so that people can see you for this picture, you know. Mm-hmm. So he smiled a little bit when they took the picture. I was just like, but it's like, he was so angry filling out the form on the website to fill out the appointment. He was like, he exploded 6 times, you know. He just could not do it. And I just kept saying to him, we were there with his stepmom, and I said, I just want you to know there's people all over the United States who have done the exact same thing you're doing right now. We have all sworn, we have all slammed the, closed the laptop, we've all stomped away, we've all given up 40 million times, and then we've come back and we've completed the application. You can do it. And he did it. And today he got his receipt for the real ID. 7 to 10 days. He'll have it. You know?
All right.
It's just like, ugh. Anyway, happy Mother's Day.
And what's your puppy dog's name again?
This is Maddie. She was groomed today.
Oh, I can tell. Pretty
Very,
girl.
very tidy today.
Yeah, it doesn't smell like a dog.
No, not. Yeah. I'm going to keep listening and go home.
Okay.
No, it's a minute away. Yeah, I'm still here.
Thank you for sharing.
Drive safe, all right?
Oh, yeah, so far.
Don't speed.
Would anybody else like to tell a story? Elizabeth, do you have one tonight?
Well, I had such a terrible day. Well, actually, everything ended up well. That I was thinking, well, I'm going to listen to these people and their beautiful stories.
Well, I'm glad you came.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare anything. No, so.
Is there a spontaneous story you could tell us about your mother?
Yes, actually, yes, I can do that. My mother was almost an orphan. So her mother died very young. And my mother was 2 years old at the time. And she had 2 older sisters and of course the father. And when her mother died, it was in the summer in Bucharest, 1928. So it was just a very terrible time in the summer, very, very hot. Winds from the steppes and dust, and was just miserable. So the family was there, prepared for the burial and memorial meal and all that thing. And my mother was this 2 years old, completely neglected. Nobody really cared about her. And on the top of everything, she was full of boils. So one of the aunts in the family looked at her and she said, well, you know, she is not going to make it without her mother and with all those boils on her. We better just put her with the mother in the coffin and, you know, then that will be something good and taken care of and won't be any problems. Well, you know, lucky, didn't happen that. Somebody else said, no, let's keep her. So she grew up until she was 7 in her father's house with the 2 older sisters. The older sisters were at the worst time. One was almost 18 and started looking to find somebody to marry. And the other one was 14, starting teenager, didn't care about anybody. So teenagers were always the same, doesn't matter the year. And so she didn't have any really close female relationship, didn't feel nurtured or anything. She was fed and, you know, bath and, you know, clean and everything, but wasn't any warmth in her life. Father was an attorney. He worked very hard. He had long hours. He tried to marry several times, but he couldn't because the older daughters were always so cross with anybody, other female coming in the house that could not really live with them. And then at 7, her father, my grandfather, put her in a boarding school. And that is where she actually grew up, in the boarding schools until she was 16. So I think for that reason, my mother was kind of distant in all her relationships with children and relatives and anybody, because she didn't really have that nurturing from another woman as when she grew up. So she could not relate. She was a good mother because she watched for my sister and I, for our education, and she was very much art lovers, music in particular, opera in special. So we grew up with this education that, stayed with us until now. And I kind of took it to my son, and he enjoys music and values that to his life. But otherwise, I don't have really memories of us like little girls, and the mother would be like our friend, and we will talk about boys and girlfriends and all that thing that I see other people doing, and read all kinds of books and stories. So we didn't have that. Was pretty much was not cold, but was kind of structured in a way that there was like always you have a job, and then you do the job, and then you would be okay. But otherwise, she had a lot of sensibility. She liked us to be nicely dressed, don't go out, and that you are not put together. And some of it stayed with us, with me more than with my sister. But I can't really say anything because this is how she grew up. And then one time, when we were both old, after 50, kind of you go to the same age with your mother. She said, well, I never had a motherly example to follow, so I did the best I could. So, we unfortunately, she developed, she lived for a long time. She was 94. And I was talking with some of my relatives, and I said, well, I don't remember anybody in my family, being mentally debilitated and senile to the point that she was. And the answer was, well, nobody lived that long in our family. So we don't know what would have been in the future. So that's the story, a short story with my mother.
Thank you for sharing.
Will you tell us her name?
Her name was Elena, E-L-E-N-A, Elena. One name only.
Her last name?
Her last name, I have to write it down to spell it to you.
No one is truly dead until they're forgotten.
Yeah. Well, no, she's not forgotten.
No.
And you said you think you said something about that you feel your mother's hands and touch and everything. Probably this was going on longer than I can realize, but in this last 2 years that she's gone, I surprised myself with a lot of gestures and and things that were hers,
Mhm.
actually. Yeah. So, okay, so I'm spelling Christescu.
How do you pronounce it?
Cristescu.
Cristesco.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cristescu.
Elena Cristesco.
Yeah. All right.
May her memory be a blessing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gorgeous. Thank you for telling us. Thank you.
I have a short story about my mother that I told at her memorial service. My mother loved to play cards, and she taught all of us to play lots of different card games. She was the most skilled double solitaire player I ever played against. She ever went easy on me. And I mean, we played hearts. We all learned how to play bridge. We played board games as well. And so when our oldest son, Matthew, graduated from college in 1998, she flew back with us. He graduated from Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. And my oldest brother lived in central Pennsylvania in a little town called Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania. So after the commencement ceremony, we drove to my brother's house, and we spent, I think, a couple of days there. But there was one day, and I don't remember if it was the same day as the commencement, but Chris was tired and she went upstairs to lay down, take a nap. And the rest of us were downstairs, and the youngsters, so Matthew was like 22 or 23, Jason was about 20, and his daughter, my brother's daughter, Beth, was a year older than Matthew. She was like 23, 24. They were playing cards at one table, and my brother Jim and I were playing cards at the other table with my mother, and we were playing hearts. And she, at that point, she was 80 years old. She absolutely cleaned our clocks. And I don't know if you know about the card game hearts, but there's a thing, generally you try not to take hearts, and the Queen of Spades counts 13 points against you. But if you shoot the moon, which means you take the Queen of Spades and all the hearts and nobody else gets any of them, it counts 0 points against you, but it counts 26 points against all your opponents. And my mother shot the moon 3 times. And Jim and I just couldn't believe that she was getting away with this. And we just started laughing and laughing. And she made it all the more funny. She kept saying, "I thought I raised you boys to be smarter than that." and we were laughing so hard, it woke Chris up upstairs because the laughter was bubbling up. And her bedroom was right above where we were playing cards. So that's one of the pleasant memories I have of my mother.
Nice emoji, Adrian.
Laugh so hard you cry.
Penny, did you tell something tonight and I missed it? You're muted.
No, actually, I emailed John just after 10 o'clock tonight, which is where I am, and he responded instantly with the link. So I came in a little late, but I have a small memory of my mother because it's one of my favorites. She was, and I thought about her all day, of course, on Mother's Day, because I still miss her so. She died 27 years ago. Mother planted chives wherever she lived. We had a victory garden during World War II when I was a baby. And we had chives and mince, and then we had peas and beans and other things. But when we moved, when I was 9, she planted, in the new house, she planted more chives and more mint. We got a summer house when I was 11, and she planted chives in Maine by the foot of the kitchen steps. And when I moved back she died in 1995. And when I moved back east from Los Angeles in 2007 and went to Maine, I found a very thriving, large clump of chives at the base of the kitchen steps.
Nice.
And I was just blown away. So I said, well, you know, this works. So I got some kind of something to dig up a bunch of chives, and I wrapped them in damp paper towels, and I drove them the 4 hours back to Wellesley and planted them.
Oh.
So I had mother's chives. Well, then there was a point at which I said I couldn't make them live. And my next door neighbor said, well, the rabbits are eating them all. I said, the rabbits don't eat chives. And he said, take a look. And my chives were down to nubbins. I said, oh dear. He said, look, I've got a pot that's off the, it's a couple feet up from the ground. You transplant them there. That's fine. So I went and got myself a pot, and I tried that, and that worked. His chives were fine. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. So I don't remember how, but I got a great big clay pot and a metal pot inside it. And I planted both chives and basil, and I had basil for a long time. Well, the chives thrived, and I used them for 15 years. And then 2 years ago, I moved to senior residence living. And about, I forget, 25 or miles or so away. And I was back in Wellesley visiting, and I to do errands. In the car, I swear, the car took a right angle turn. And it went back to where I had lived. It was a condo and a house. The house had been turned into 3 condos. And I had bought a condo there and moved there. And in the backyard, there was my pot with the pot inside and all the chives, which had been neglected completely. Nobody paid any attention to them, including the new owner of my condo. I had the phone number of one of the other residents. So I called her. She didn't answer. And I thought, well, is anybody really going to miss these? So I asked some neighbor for a trowel. And the chives had been so neglected that the dirt was packed dry, and you couldn't dig into it to get the chives up. So I looked at this was a large clay pot. It's about, 18 or so inches across. And I thought, well, I could, they obviously don't care about them. So I picked the pot up and I lugged it across the backyard, and I put it in the trunk of my car. And I drove it back down to where I live now in Hingham. And I thought, now, what am I going to do with this? Well, I walked to the entrance of my building, and there was a man there who had a perfectly beautiful apartment with a gorgeous yard. He waters it all the time. He cultivates irises and roses and many other things. It's a beautiful place. And I said, Ed, could you give this pot a little house room just for a little while? And he said, oh, sure. Here, do you want my car? He took his, whatever you use for a cart, to my car, brought the pot back, put the pot in his backyard, and it's been there ever since. And I have mother's chives from what she planted before she died. It must have been 50 years ago now. And I still cultivate mother's chives. And I think of her every time I sneak down the back stairs to snip a few just to put in some cooking. It's truly a wonderful memory. I have many other things I could talk about if I had any preparation for this, but the story of the chives is really, it makes me happy.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's wonderful.
Gorgeous. John, can I share one more thing about gardens?
Yeah, sure.
Others. Okay. So one of the books my mother was reading in 1980 was by E.B. White's wife. Her name was Catherine S. White. Katharine. And I'll put the link in the chat. The book is called Onward and Upward in the Garden. And this is her book. And my mother was reading it in 1980, which was the year that she passed away, later on in June. But I was with her birthday weekend in April. And Catherine S. White writes in this book about how much she loved seed catalogs. She loved seed catalogs and had favorites as based on who was writing them.
Honey,
close the door. Thank you. Just close it.
I can't go to sleep with you
Okay.
up here.
And can you close the door?
I can't go
Thank you. I'm almost done. My husband can't sleep. So, and it's called Onward and Upward in the Garden. I'll put it in the chat. But she just loved, she appreciated the writing in seed catalogs. And I've just always remembered that. So I'll put the book, I don't know if any of you have ever read it, but I had it for many, many years and cracked it a few times.
No, I didn't read the book, but I am fascinated by the seed catalogs.
You like them too?
Yes, all the flowers and the pictures with the fruits and everything is just amazing. So
yeah.
Well, anybody else have any stories or anything to share? Turned out to be an interesting evening. I will add one more thing about my mother. Before she died, I think, or maybe it was after she died and we took it, we got a bonsai plant of hers. It's I think it's called a ginkgo tree. And she grew lots and lots of bonsai plants. And we've been able to keep that bonsai tree alive. She died in 2010. And it's kind of special. Actually, I think we had two and one of them died, but this one has survived. And I guess bonsai plants can live a long time.
How big is it?
The tree itself is maybe a foot high. And Chris keeps it trimmed. I water it and she trims it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, well, she waters it too when I'm not around. But
and where does it live in your house?
It's on the front porch.
Mm-hmm. Sometime will you make a picture and put it on Facebook?
Yeah, that's a good idea. In fact, I was so busy Mother's Day trying to make it a nice day for Chris, I didn't think anything at all about my own mother. Maybe I can post a couple of things about my mother on Facebook.
Yeah. Your mamas would probably go like this when if they heard that. They'd say, oh, good. He's celebrating Chris.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm not hearing anybody else wanting to share anything. So thank you all for joining and sharing. And I will try to do a better job getting this meeting summarized and posted than I did the last meeting, which I still haven't done. I've been very busy with Sierra Club stuff lately and gardening.
Yeah.
Getting my summer garden in.
Where's Barbara Rugeley? Is she still sometimes doing the summary, or has she moved on to other activities?
She's had conflicts on these Tuesday nights the last couple of months, but yes, she's still a member of the group, and she's just had things come up that she couldn't make the meeting, but I'm sure she'll be back with us.
Can I make a little announcement before we sign off?
Sure.
So the Nsn Summer Conference is, from what we understand, going to be one day, the National Storytelling Network Conference. And the special interest groups have been encouraged to schedule their pre-conference day not next to the single day that the Nsn conference will be on. So they're not going to produce a 3 or 4 day event in July as they thought they might.
Where will it be this year?
It's virtual, and it's only going to be 1 day.
Okay.
There was a very successful event called Earth Up in April, the very first weekend of April. And they recorded that, and those recordings are available. And it was really quite magnificent. Wonderful concerts and workshops. And people, I think, can still register to receive and watch those recordings for the length of a year. And it was like $100 registration for the 3 or 4 days of time. So I just wanted to point that to you all. They didn't have very many registrations going into the weekend, which was why the board made a decision not to try to produce a 4-day event this summer, just as things are opening up, you know. So the Youth Educators and Storytellers Special Interest Group, we are having our pre-conference day in August on the 11th, and I can put that in the chat, but there'll be more information about that. So just to let people
I have a question for you, Angela. The Southern California Story Swap Facebook page.
Yeah.
There have been a whole bunch of people who have asked to join, and they all know you.
Yeah, I invited them.
But they haven't been admitted. I mean, when I go there, it's maybe some of them have been admitted, but some of them haven't. They're all legitimate people.
Uh-huh. Yes, I invited them to an event that was on that page, which is how they got there.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that I admit them, or that I send them a note and say, forget about it?
Well, I don't know. Do you want them to be a member of that Facebook group?
Well,
or was it just for this one event you wanted them there?
It was for this one event, so I could check in with them. I'll go back to the page and look at it. But it was an event that was there, and I did get messages from people who are not on Facebook and they couldn't access the event.
Yeah.
It was Ethnotech's concert for Ukraine. That's what I shared out to a lot of folks. So,
okay.
Do you want me to? So I'll just go back and give it some attention.
Yeah, because I kept getting emails to admit them, and I didn't know them.
You didn't know who they were.
Yeah, I guess I have administrative status with that.
Do I?
I don't know.
Well, it let me post.
Yeah. But did you get emails saying so-and-so wants to join the Facebook group?
I did see some of those recently, and I admitted them all.
Okay.
Because I know them.
All right.
But that brings up to mind, did you ever hear anything about the Story Swap annual?
No.
Not happening.
Skipped this year.
Not happening. Not even virtually.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, Nick, do you have any news or things to share?
No, not this month.
Okay. All right. Well, then I guess I will stop the recording.